are a lot of toys or bikes all over the yard. All of this tells us a lot about how everything is being cared for.
Let's get back to the eviction process. You stated before in Florida a tenant can be out within 3 to 3.5 weeks. What is the procedure?
Rents are usually due according to the lease on the first of the month, with a 5-day grace period after that. If the tenant has not paid by the end of the grace period, any time after that you deliver a 3-day notice. If they still do not pay, you then go to the courthouse with a copy of the lease and file the eviction. The sheriff then delivers a notice stating they must pay, or write to the court and tell them why they're not paying. At the end of this time frame, if the tenant still hasn't paid, you go back to the courthouse and file for what is called a writ of possession. This then goes to the judge, and if all paperwork has been done exactly correct, all I's dotted, T's crossed, the writ will be granted. The sheriff then goes out and posts a 24-hour time frame for the tenant to get out. At that point, you need to coordinate with the sheriff with a time to meet that is convenient for the sheriff and you to meet at the property. You really don't know if the tenant has actually left or not, and whether they have moved out totally or left things in the property. You will need to bring help with you to physically remove anything from the house, and it all goes out on the curb. This could actually be a lot worse. When we were in Ireland, they still evict tenants for non-payment by removing the roofs from the property. Bit extreme, however, I guess it works. On this note, the owner must realize that at no time can the owner change the locks on the rental properties so the tenant cannot get back in, or have utilities turned off, or refuse repairs, even if they're late. This is all illegal. As I said, this is a lot easier to do than in a lot of states. However, word of warning, if all paperwork is not done exactly correct, the judge will throw out the eviction, and you're left to start over again with a 3-day notice, go through the court system, etc.
What is the cost to evict a tenant?
Up until July 1st of 2008, you could count on paying $94.50, including the sheriff's cost. As of that date, the law changed from the court cost of $80 to $270 for a single tenant eviction. This seriously impacted the landlord and the tenant because this was a tenant cost for the court imparted to the tenant. This came about because of the budgetary crisis in Florida. There was a huge outcry about the unfairness of this. So beginning July 1st, 2009, the filing fee became $180. However, there is still a summons issuance fee of $10 per defendant, which therefore to evict one person, the cost is $280, but an additional $10 per defendant to issue the summons. You then will be charged a $90 writ of possession fee at the end, if it goes that far, which a lot of times it is settled before the writ is required. However, if you don't know if they've moved out or what the situation is, definitely go through with a writ of possession. One last thing I just wanted to put in here, that it's extremely important, know your lease. Does it address all the laws? Does it include a mold addendum? Does it include a pet addendum? Does it include the maintenance and how the tenant's supposed to care for the property? Everyone of age must sign the lease. Everyone under age must be listed on the lease. Cars owned, that you can expect to see on the premises is a great idea to have included in the lease. But just know your lease.
This concludes our presentation. Feel free to type questions in on the screen, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. The first question we have this morning Elsie, you said the owner has 30 days to put a claim on a security deposit. What happens if, after you send the claim letter, more damage is found?
If you're within the 30-day window, you can send out a revised security deposit claim letter. If it's over the 30-day window, you cannot claim anything further from that security deposit. You can, however, pursue payment through collections or small claims, just not through that security deposit.
Another question. In Florida, what is by law considered a long-term rental?
Florida law states 6 months plus 1 day. I don't know who decided that time frame, but that is considered long-term rental in the state of Florida. You, of course, can rent for a shorter period of time. 6 months or less, the tenant is going to be charged with sales tax, which involves the county and state tax.
I've heard there are a lot of scams out there pertaining to renting of properties. Is this true? And if so, what kind of scams are you seeing?
The ones that I've heard about mostly of late would be from Craigslist or any of the lists that are on different internet things. One of which, if you put a house, say you have a property to rent, and you put this on Craigslist, a scammer, for lack of a better term, gets a hold of this and puts it on theirs, and lots of times puts the rent at a much lower rent rate than you have it listed, and more or less takes over the property as being their own, which it's not. And you have a prospective tenant come along, contacts this person, the person that's doing the scam, and the person responds and says, well, if you will send me the deposit equal to a month's rent, and of course the mailing and so forth, we'll send you the keys. The prospective tenant sends the money, of course never gets the keys. There have been some instances that I have heard of that they have actually moved people into properties, and this becomes a huge problem. So be very careful with who you're dealing with.
And I believe this is our final question this morning. If the property is sold while tenant still has a lease, what happens? Is the tenant out?
No, a quick answer to that question is the property can sell 10 times and the lease will survive. When a tenant rents a property, the tenant has a full right to use, and the use of that property for the period of time is defined in the lease agreement, being called the right of use clause. This can, however, be modified in the lease, stating if the property sells, the tenant will be given X amount of time to vacate. If that is the case, the tenant will have agreed to this prior to the signing of the lease, and this clause will appear in the lease, which is known as a kick-out clause. Otherwise, if there is no such clause, the tenant has the right to remain in the property to the end of the lease.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. This webinar will be posted on our website at davidsonrealtyinc.com and will be available along with many other webinars for you to listen to at your convenience. And if you have any further questions or would like clarification of anything we've talked about this morning, you can contact Elsie at 904-484-2170. Thanks again.